My name is Eva Hamer. I am a recovering lonely vegan. And when I say lonely vegan, I mean that there were about 10 years of my life when I was the only vegan that I knew. So I was the only person, it felt like I was the only person in the world who really thought about animals in the way that we all do, like they actually matter. And when I say recovering, I mean I moved pretty far up what grassroots organizers call the ladder of engagement. So when I was finally invited to join the movement, I started going to DXE protests in Chicago, and then eventually started organizing the protests and spicier actions and demonstrations and open rescues, and then eventually started a full-time role with DXE, and then left them to start my own thing, first Pax Fauna, which does original research to support the grassroots animal freedom movement's narrative and culture, and then Pro Animal Future, which is putting some of those findings into practice by running volunteer-powered ballot initiatives to change real policies in culturally significant ways. And I'm really interested in the grassroots, and so I'm really interested in recruitment. I'm really interested in getting people, like how do we get people involved, and how do we keep them involved, and how do we raise their capacity to stay involved? So when I think about burnout, I'm thinking about really preserving the most valuable resource that the movement has, which is its people, which is kind of the least renewable. Can't always just replace someone when they leave. That's someone who we've really invested a lot in their capacity who leaves. So with Pax Fauna, I did a study that looked at, I think, 38 animal freedom organizers, wanted to know why they got involved and why they stayed involved, what threatened their involvement or made them quit. Spoiler, it's usually burnout, some form or another. And I want to tell you a little bit about the findings. We structured the findings off the stages of grief. If you're familiar with the stages of grief, at the time I got involved in the movement, I was working in hospice. They're very kind of second nature to me, but I'll tell you about them. By Kubler-Ross, we'll refer to stages of grief that way. The first stage they called denial. I called it powerlessness, to kind of reflect some of the language that our participants used. This sense that you do not know how your actions can possibly make a difference. There's this sense that why would I even try? Because there's nothing that my intervention can possibly do. Pax Fauna and other researchers sort of call that futility. And next there's anger, which I think we're very familiar with, especially in these kinds of conversations. This anger can be kind of very fiery at non-vegans or non-activists or even kind of imperfect allies when we're talking about conflict in our organizations or movement. I called the next stage passion, but the original stages of grief called it bargaining. And I want to point to the thing about bargaining, which is like, I will do anything to make this problem less. Like, just give me a job, I will do it. One of the participants of the study said, remember, like, I'm a body, use me. Like, just anything that this organization wanted, I was willing to do because I just so need to do something. Sometimes folks in this experience will not even really care what the organization is, or what the theory of change is, or whether they really agree with it, or just really want to get involved. And that's a beautiful thing, to just really want to participate, and of course that can lead to burnout. The next stage was called depression in the original stages of grief. I could have called it burnout, instead I called it defeat for some reason. And that I'm really pointing to this experience of, like, I have been doing so much work, and I've been giving up my nights and weekends, and it's spare money, and I've been driving everywhere, and I just, have I even made a difference? Like, I've been giving up so much of myself, and has anything even changed? There was a participant in the study who said something like, you know, all these nights and weekends, all this money, and have we even helped a single animal? And there's this real kind of emptiness in this experience. And when people were able to move out of that, they were able to come up with some self-talk that gave them some reasons to staying involved. And the final stage was called acceptance. I don't really like acceptance, because it's not like we're accepting the problem, we're working so hard to stop it. I called it wisdom, this sort of integrated grief experience. And so what I'll be talking about is a few kind of takeaways that I have from this study that we can kind of try to incorporate in our organizations. The first is conflict resolution. I think conflict was the biggest threat to participants' sense of wellness and longevity in the movement, conflict between activists. I can't encourage enough conflict resolution policies and trainings before they're needed, so before we're at the point of crisis, but giving a little bit of kind of inoculation to conflict, at least some norm statements about how we engage in conflict here. I'll also be talking about kind of norms of self-care. From other research in things like diet change, we know that people make decisions not really based off their values so much as the norms, what they feel like is normal in their organization, in their peers, the people around them. And so we'll be talking about really the need for norms of self-care in the movement. And that means that we all do it, and it's kind of weird if we don't. Some organizers would tell me about getting in these positions where different organizers would sort of one-up each other about how little they had slept or how hard they had been working, and it was sort of cool to be really not taking care of yourself. And of course we have moments like of course there's a sprint. There's a moment when you're all working really hard because the big action's coming up, or there's a conference where we're all hanging out late at the bar and then waking up early in the morning, and there is also time to rest. And I just want to say it's not cool or cute to just be chronically not taking care of yourself. And I think that when we find that kind of dynamic happening and people are sort of one-upping each other, we want to respond as if someone has said something very dark, because they really have. And then finally, the sort of biggest piece that came out of this was the sense of inspiration that was really keeping people going. I think that a lot of our organizations are in the position to kind of manufacture inspiration. I think that inspiration is sort of the thing that we're offering the world in order to get what we need to do the work that we are doing. And there are some people in organizations that get to do the really inspiring work and kind of gets to keep them going. And I get to do this, I get to give a little talk, or I get to, go visit DXC or give a speak out or something. And I mean, when I first got involved, I was like, I got to do open rescues. I got to go into places where animals were being hurt, and I got to take them out. And now I run payroll. And it's not the it's important work, and we got to do it. It's got to get done. And I want everybody to get a little taste, at least sometimes, of the most inspiring work that our movement has to offer. Because I think this really is what keeps us going. Yeah, when I think of burnout, I think of the loss of motivation. And of course, that can be related to all these different things. We're working too much. We're not taking care of ourselves. We've been ostracized from our community, or we've had some perception of that. And I think that there are a lot of people, which I got from this study that we conducted with Pax Fauna, a lot of people who I think the movement has lost to burnout, to conflict or overwork or whatever it is, this loss of motivation, that I think we could get back if we were able to address the problems that kept them away. And I think that what that means is really giving them something worth coming back for, sort of upgrading the purpose-driven, the results-driven nature of our work, the likelihood that the way that we can sell our work is likely to be successful, and also as sort of promising that the work that we are offering is something that is safe, as much as possible, safe to be involved in from a health standpoint and a mental health standpoint. I had this really strong temptation to look at the stigma on talking about feelings and talking about touchy-feely things, talking about conflict and communication. I have this really strong temptation to look at this stigma and label it as a little bit chauvinistic. There's something that's a little bit anti-femme about some of our obsession with just the facts, ma'am. And by naming that, I really want to invite us to say, well, what's the most effective thing to do? If we're losing people after 6 months, is that the most effective way to meet our goals? And I don't think that that's true. And I think that a lot of us haven't really been socialized to develop the emotional skills that we need to deal with ourselves, much less to deal with others and their emotions. And let's very plainly consider that a skills deficit as leaders and as activists. That it's not because we're not serious, it's not because we're too femme, it's that we've been socialized a particular way, and there are ways that we can sort of invest in ourselves and invest in other people to kind of develop the emotional regulation skills, the communication skills, and the conflict skills to deal with the problems that we're actually facing. When we want people to take time off, we want people to do it, and if there's just one less step to do it, people will do it more. So, do people have to request time off? Is it in advance? Can you minimize the request process? I think what we do is we just literally put it on the calendar, and then I see it on the calendar. I don't need to do any kind of back and forth with folks in my organization. And I'll double-click norms of self-care as leaders doing the things. really cool thing that I have noticed lately. Now, I got a treadmill desk, and I have been talking about it nonstop, and now I get to talk about it on stage. And I was so worried before I did it, and I thought it was going to be super distracting, and everybody was going to have to, what?
What did you get?
A treadmill desk.
Oh.
Got a treadmill desk.
Never heard of that.
Let me tell you. So so I was worried that I would be distracting because I'm on a lot of Zoom calls. And I noticed that it was not, and nobody said anything. And I mentioned that to somebody here. I've been talking about this quite a bit. And they told me, oh, no, in the animal movement, everybody uses treadmill desks. And I just want to share that with all of you in case you don't know that it's not weird to use a treadmill desk. Sitting, I mean, honestly, like sitting is deadly. Sitting all day is deadly, and you could not do that and still get your work done. And I want everyone to know that. So is it inevitable? When I think of burnout as a metaphor, I think of a fire burning out. And so the question is like, okay, well, if your career is a fire, if your life is a fire, yes, eventually it will end. Will it end in what we're calling burnout? Will it end because you suffered a terrible conflict or overworked and just can't keep going anymore? Or will it end because you got old and decided it was time to retire? Either way, I just want to say I'm really grateful that all of you are working in the movement for the time that you are. I'm really, really grateful for every contribution that you give for however long you give it. There's almost the sense, I worry, we were talking about this, like, oh, I want people to stay, I want them to stay. And of course I want them to stay, but also like there's a time that you will not be doing this anymore for whatever reason. And that doesn't mean that what you did before didn't matter. It really does matter that we're all here. And I hope that gives you meaning kind of regardless of how long you do stay.